Hello and welcome to a discussion on religion and art. Today I will discuss on the concept of aesthetics, its basic nature and how it has provided the framework for diverse artistic activities through time and space. The discussion will be divided into two major sections, that is, the Western perspective of aesthetics and the Indian concept or Rosho Tattva. The relation between art and religion is one of the most difficult questions that we have to face. We look back into the past and see art and religion emerging hand in hand from the dim recesses of prehistory. For many centuries, they seem to remain eternally linked. Finally, we accept the fact that there can be no great art or great periods of art without an intimate link between art and religion. Even where great artists have created their masterpieces in apparent isolation from any religious faith, the more closely we look into their lives, the more likely we are to discover the presence of what we can only call religious sensibility. All artists have the same intention, the desire to please, and art is most simply and most usually defined as an attempt to create pleasing forms. Such forms satisfy our sense of beauty, and the sense of beauty is satisfied when we are able to appreciate a unity or harmony of formal relations among our sense perceptions. Aesthetics must begin with the supposition that man responds to the shape and surface and mass of things present to his senses, and that certain arrangements in the proportion of the shape and surface and mass of things result in a pleasurable sensation, whilst the lack of such arrangement leads to indifference or even to positive discomfort and revulsion. The sense of pleasurable relations is the sense of beauty. The opposite sense is the sense of ugliness. The word aesthetics is derived from the Greek word aesthenomai. The simple word art is generally associated with those arts which we distinguish as plastic or visual, but properly speaking, it should include the arts of literature and music and that of the performing domain. Art throughout the ages has been associated with different religious ideologies. As the concept of aesthetics developed, we find two major trends dominating its trajectory. One is of rationalism, that is, to perceive beauty by reason, and the other is of immediacy, that is, beauty perceived on sensory judgments or the outcome of the spontaneous overflow of emotions. Aesthetics, or the sense of beauty, is a resultant of a unity of formal relations among our sense perceptions. It must be kept in mind that the term beauty is a relative one. The only alternative is to say that art has no necessary connection with beauty. A perfectly logical position to hold if we confine the term to that concept of beauty established by the Greeks and continued by the classical tradition in Europe. The sense of beauty is a very fluctuating phenomenon with manifestations in the course of history that are very uncertain and often very baffling. The concept of beauty arose in ancient civilizations, in ancient Greece, India, and elsewhere. It was the offspring of a particular philosophy of life. That philosophy was anthropomorphic in kind and exalted all human values and saw in the gods nothing but man writ large. Art, as well as religion, was an idealization of nature and specially of man as the culminating point of the process of nature. Regarding the Western perspective, let us begin with Plato and Aristotle. Plato highlighted individual perception, while Aristotle considered artistic perception as a universal truth. The work of Neoplatonic philosophy involved providing a systematic description of the derivation of the whole of reality from a single principle, the One. Secondly, while the Neoplatonists generally shared some basic assumptions about the nature of reality, there were also considerable differences in their views and approaches. Plotinus, Iamblichus, Longinus propagated Neoplatonism. So far as the association between art and religion in the Western perspective is concerned, what is conspicuous in the paintings of Vasari is the significance attributed to the metaphysical and the divine. On the other hand, Kant emphasized logical, and sensual thoughts as predominant factors in the perception of aesthetics. Hegel was more objective in his approach, as he particularly stressed on the objectivity of aesthetics. In this connection, one cannot ignore the new development propounded by the two well-known British schools, which emphasized that aesthetics is the sensory stimulus to one's moral character. This new approach was fundamental in the contemporary creations. If we judge the different phases classified under Classicism, Baroque and Romanticism, etc., we are aware of the fact that most of our misconceptions of art of a particular phase arise from a lack of consistency in the use of the words art and beauty. It might be said that we are only consistent in our misuse of them. We always assume that all that is beautiful is art, or that all art is beautiful, that what is not beautiful is not art, and that ugliness is the negation of art. This identification of art and beauty is at the bottom of all our difficulties in the appreciation of art, and even in people who are acutely sensitive to aesthetic impressions in general. This assumption acts like an unconscious censor in particular cases when art is not beauty. For art is not necessarily beauty. Whether we look at the problem historically, considering what art has been in past ages, or sociologically, considering what art actually is in its present day manifestations all over the world, we find that art often has been or often is a thing of no beauty. Let us look at Classicism. Classicism in the arts refers generally to a high regard for a classical period, classical antiquity in the Western tradition, as setting standards for taste which the classicists seek to emulate. The art of classicism typically seeks to be formal and restrained. Classical art signified perfect or ideal types of humanity, perfectly formed, perfectly proportioned, noble, and serene. In one word, beautiful. This ideal was achieved in diverse forms in time and space, and we can speak of the Renaissance ideal, Byzantine ideal, which was divine rather than human, primitive ideal, a propitiation, an expression of fear in the face of a mysterious and implacable world. The Oriental ideal, abstract, both human and non-human, metaphysical yet instinctive. Quite different from Classicism is the Baroque. The Baroque is often thought of as a period of artistic style that used exaggerated motion and clear, easily interpreted detail to produce drama, tension, exuberance, and grandeur in sculpture, painting, architecture, literature, dance, and music. The style began around 1600 in Rome, Italy, and spread to different parts of Europe. It must be kept in mind that the popularity and success of the Baroque style was encouraged by the Catholic Church. Romanticism, first defined as an aesthetic in literary criticism around 1800, gained momentum as an artistic movement in France and Britain in the early decades of the 19th century, with its emphasis on the imagination and emotion. Romanticism emerged as a response to the disillusionment with the Enlightenment values of reason and order in the aftermath of the French Revolution. Another significant trend was that of realism. Realism or naturalism in the arts is the attempt to represent the subject matter truthfully. It negates artificiality and avoids artistic conventions, implausible, exotic, and supernatural elements. Indian artists began with the intangible life force or Shakti, which is ever evolving and transforming itself into the phantasmagoria of the visible universe or Maya, ever creating and sustaining the macrocosm and its microcosmic part and counterpart, the human organism. Indian aesthetics creates forms, and such forms are suggested to the Indian artist by a dynamic philosophy that is intrinsic to his religious and philosophical tradition. For the worship of the life force pouring into the universe and maintaining it, manifesting itself no less in the gross matter of daily experience than in the divine beings of religious vision, constitutes the very foundation of Indian religious life. The ancient Indian texts provide much information on aesthetics and the sense of beauty pervading the universe. According to this doctrine, which was particularly influential in the great periods of Indian art, release from the bondage of our normal human imperfection can be gained not only through the world negating methods of asceticism or yoga, but equally through a perfect realization of love and its sensual enjoyment or bhoga. According to this view, which has been eloquently expressed in the so-called tantric symbols and rituals of both the Hindu and the Buddhist traditions, there is intrinsically no antagonism between yoga and bhoga. The basis of Indian aesthetics is Rasho Tattva. An abiding flavor or Rasho is the soul of an artistic or literary theme. There are 9 recognized roshos according to the ancient texts. These include Sringaro or erotic, Hasho or comic or humorous, Karuna or compassionate, Veera or heroic, Rodro or fearful, Bhayanako or horrific, Bibhatsha or repellent, Adbhuta or wonderful, and Shanto or tranquil. These individual roshos are reflected in the vast Indian repertoire of sculpture, painting, and different forms of performing arts, besides literature and music. The Indian artist always works within a very strictly delineated tradition. The attitude of the artist fashioning images is to be the same as that of the devotee or bhakta, invoking and contemplating the forms of the same gods in daily worship. The tradition of the craft is transmitted from master to pupil and is supported by a body of written books, the Shilpo Shastras, textbooks or Shastras of craftsmanship or Shilpo. According to the most comprehensive Indian manual on architecture, sculpture, and the other crafts, the Manoshara Shilpa Shastra, 4 types of craftsmen are to be distinguished. The master builder or Stapati, who is learned in all branches of Indian sciences, the surveyor or Shutragrohi, the handler of the measuring line or Shutro, the designer or Vardaki, and the carpenter or Takshaka. Each is inferior to the one before. The Indian statue must conform strictly to the correct vision of the divinity as rendered in the Orthodox tradition. The projection of the divine life force from within the initiate to the figure facilitates the subsequent act of projecting a vision. And to make the latter possible, the fashioner of the image must render a faithful copy of the orthodox concept of the god. The statue otherwise would be useless for the purposes of worship. Essentially, it is a utensil, a vessel designed to receive and to hold a charge of consciousness projected from within by a meditating devotee. The form has to function technically, that is to say, in the actual crisis of a psychological transference. If in European art throughout the Middle Ages and in later Catholic art, non-individualism was fundamental, so likewise in India, the orthodox sacred model was never to be employed as a vehicle for self-expression. Indian aesthetics did not get lost or entangled in details. The whole figure was treated simultaneously. Each nuance, every line voiced the one impulse of life and the subtle bliss of being. One feels a current of life in these delicate yet vigorous forms. There is movement going on without pause underneath the gently heaving surface. The simple and universal fact of the life process refreshing the organism is reflected in Indian aesthetics. Brahmanical, Buddhist, and Jain sculptures, in their perfection and glory, rested on those intimate experiences of the living organism and mysteries of the life process that derive from the inward awareness gained through yogic experiences. In India, the beauty of images is not intended for the aesthetic enjoyment of the secular beholder. It is a contribution to their magical force as instruments or tools or yantra. The ornamentation facilitates the process of conjuring or inviting into the statue as into a temporary residence the divinity with whom the devotee in meditation is finally to become one. For since the apparition of the benevolent aspect of the god is full of auspicious, dazzling charm, the representation, which is the vessel that is to contain his essence, must be dazzling too. An Indian image is properly an outward vessel corresponding precisely to the inner vision of the divinity, and this in turn is a personification of the fundamental nature of the devotee. A figure of wood, clay, or stone is thus given life, and simultaneously its identity with the intrinsic nature of the devotee is stressed and established. For according to the Indian idea, the life breath or prana, before being poured into the outer image, should already have conjured into form within the mind and spirit of the devotee an adequate vision of the God to be adored. Throughout the ensuing act of worship, the two images, the inward and the outward, are therefore filled with the same life breath, and at the conclusion of the period of worship, this life breath is taken back by the devotee through another breathing rite, after which the outward image or pratima, the utensil of worship or the yantra, is again without life. With this, I conclude today's discussion on aesthetics and its two major dimensions. Thank you for attending the lecture, and I hope to meet you in some other discussion on some other topic.